Hi, I'm Avery. I'm a knight in the SCA. I live in Caid. I was knighted in Ontir, and I also lived in the West for a short time. I've got an idea that I would like to share with you. It's about how the rules for SCA armored combat are put together. And I've been working on this idea for a really long time, almost since I started fighting about 20 years ago. But particularly over the last year, it's finally coalesced for me. So this idea, it pulls together a few different things. So what I'm hoping to do is describe those things and then give you my argument at the end. So I hope you'll be patient with me. The first thing that this is based on is that I believe over the last 20 years, SCA calibration has really sort of normalized and become relatively standard over the last 20 years. And this is backed up with, I suppose, a bit of data that I recently got. So why do I think that a standard blow has sort of come into existence? Well, 30, 40 years ago, there were all these rumors that people fought very, very differently in different kingdoms, and some kingdoms took super light and other kingdoms required you to hit them much harder before they would call a blow good. And that might have been true. I don't think it's really true anymore. And that's for a couple reasons. One, people have more disposable income relative to the cost of travel. Traveling long distances is a lot easier than it was in the 70s and 80s at the level of income that a lot of people in the SCA have. We've got more people traveling to events far away, basically, is what I'm saying, than we did 20, 30 years ago. I'm not saying no one drove a long distance, right? My mentor drove from Vancouver to Southern California to go to practices for a week worth of practices at a time, but it wasn't common. Another thing is that we've got, a lot better, faster information sharing. So you can look at video from other kingdoms and be like, whoa, that's how they fight in an Atlantean crown. That's how they fight in a Trimaran crown and stuff like that. And, I mentioned data earlier. I did an informal survey of more than 200 knights across the SCA, and more than two-thirds of them, not a lot more, about 67%, said we are throwing exactly right. Only 2% felt that we're throwing either much too heavy or much too light. Now, one thing I want to clarify here, I'm not talking about whether a blow is considered excessive or not, right? Way above what is required. What I'm talking about is the line between a light, skippy, or not good shot and one that would be considered disabling. So basically around the SCA, top level fighters, dukes, people who travel are feeling if someone would take this blow in Trimaris, they would take it in Drachenwald, they would take it in Ontir. Generally, the line of where we throw a blow is roughly the same. The other thing that I learned is that we're happy with where that line is. People don't want to be throwing and getting hit a lot harder for a minimum good shot. Right? Again, I'm not talking about the heaviest blow that you're allowed to throw before someone comes along and tells you you're bad and you shouldn't throw that hard. I'm talking about the line where a shot is considered good enough to end the fight for you. So we're happy with where that is. Less than 2% of people want to see it much lighter or much heavier. So it's pretty standard across the SCA, and our best fighters are pretty happy with it. So that's two important points. A third point I'd like to mention is that we in the society have had a law or a rule in the combat books for a really long time. And that, in my opinion, was a really, really smart idea. It's that no matter what armor you're wearing on the field, because you can wear lots, you can wear little, I wear plate, other people wear Japanese, Viking, whatever. No matter what you're actually wearing, we pretend that you're wearing standard armor. So everybody has the same calibration, no matter what their persona is or how much gear they have on. That means that me in plate armor, you don't need to hit me way harder. I don't have a huge advantage over someone doing 7th century Saxon wearing cloth armor or something, right? I don't get this big advantage because I have plate on. So you can choose to wear as much or as little armor as you want, and you still take the same calibration of blow. That's our rules. So what is that calibration? Well, actually, in our rules, the standard is actually pretty clearly spelled out. That standard is, if I can work from memory, and I'll do a better job, I'll probably try to edit in the actual rules, is that we're all wearing the riveted mail hauberk over a padded gambeson that was pretty common in the 11th and 12th centuries, that it was knee length, that we had boiled leather arm and leg protection, and a conical Norman helmet with a nasal, and a chainmail drape optionally over the face to protect against incidental cuts, and that is optional based on the kingdom. That's the only thing that varies, is does my kingdom have a light chainmail drape or not? Everyone else in every other kingdom always has exactly the same imaginary armor. The other thing built into that is that we're not trying to recreate medieval tournaments. We're trying to recreate actual combat. Granted, with a whole bunch of courtesy and chivalry, but the goal here is not to play stick tag. It's in our rules that we're trying to simulate with simulated weapons and simulated armor. We're trying to simulate actual combat. So, what's the fifth point to bring in? Well, we're learning that armor was maybe even better than a handful of people who wrote the rules in the 60s and 70s thought. Groups like the HMB and the IMCF are sort of demonstrating, although they wear more armor than our imaginary standards, demonstrating that mail works pretty good. And people have done some experiments. It's sort of hard to chop through riveted mail with a sword. Like, armor worked. So a bunch of well-intentioned guys made an educated guess in the 60s or 70s and said, we think that the reason that they said we're not recreating plate armor is we know that it's going to be tough to chop through, like way too hard for a single blow to end a fight. So why don't we set the standard here? Like, well, what do you guys think? Riveted mail hauberk. This is the Society Marshal's Handbook, from which all of the Kingdom combat rules are based. As we can see on page 11 of the 2015 edition, we have a bunch of rules that haven't changed in a really long time. Specifically, that all fully armored fighters are presumed to be wearing a chain hauberk over a padded gambeson with boiled leather arm and leg defenses, and an open-faced iron helm with a nasal. The helm may be presumed by Kingdom convention to include a very light chainmail drape permitting vision and resisting cuts by the mere touch of a bladed weapon. So that is what we're all imagined to wear in the entire SCA. This is an image that was recently used to illustrate our something pretty close to our imaginary SCA armor standards. You can see that he's got a knee-length mail hauberk. It looks like you can tell that it's over a padded gambeson, and he's got a conical iron helmet with a nasal. In this case, there's a couple places where it's not necessarily 100% what the SCA minimum standard is, because it doesn't look like he has boiled leather arm and leg protection. And it's not clear whether the conical helmet has an iron side or if it's supposed to be a mail sides on the helmet. But this is pretty close to what the SCA imaginary standard is supposed to be. Well, guess what? The SCA was based on experimentation. So they were experimenting, and with good intentions, they decided that's what the armor standard should be. But we've learned that armor works better than we thought. So, where am I going with this? First, I should tell you that mundanely, I'm a game designer. My job is to make game rules that are fun and accomplish specific purposes, but they can't be easily cheated around or exploited. Sort of like the lawyer of the game industry. Or the lawmaker, maybe, I suppose. I don't know. Anyway, there's two ways... there's two real approaches to game design, and instead I'll talk about designing a park. If you build a beautiful park and you put in your hills and your trees and your gardens and stuff, you're going to need to put in paths. There's two ways to build paths in a garden. One of them is to say, okay, I'm done my park, I'm going to put the path here. And if I catch people walking off the path and stomping through gardens and killing the grass, then I will put up fences to keep people on the path. And I will basically dictate how people move through this park space. Another way is to put in all of your features and not put in paths and observe where people walk or where the grass dies, because people want to take shortcuts. Well, My suggestion here is let's let people show us what they want and change the rules to match. Because SCA fighters are stubborn, and we've been hitting the way we want, the same all across the SCA for a long time. And no one is going to come in and convince a bunch of stubborn old knights and a bunch of stubborn old squires and a bunch of stubborn old dukes and counts and countesses and duchesses and marshals that we all need to hit way, way harder to punch through mail. So you've probably come to the same conclusion I have if you agree with most of the points I've made. It's time to change the imaginary standard that we all have. If we all like the blows that we're throwing, if we all throw and accept the same minimum blow, roughly, right? If we've learned that the armor standard that we all have isn't effective against the blow we all want to throw, what should we do? Change the imaginary armor standard. I'm not saying put on less armor. I'm not saying you shouldn't be allowed to wear a helmet or you shouldn't be allowed to wear van braces. Wear as much armor as you want. I'm not saying we need to change the rules for how much protection is the minimum requirement. We should still require elbow cops and knee cops. I'm not saying change any of the rules that change the way you fight or what you have to wear. What I'm saying is change the one rule we already have that's imaginary. We need to change the imaginary armor standard, and I'm not here to tell you what it is. The SCA was based on experimentation, so let's experiment. We all know how to throw a blow that is good enough, but not super heavy. Let's get a bunch of different kinds of armor and a bunch of weapons and climb in the backyard with the same experimental spirit that people had in the 60s and 70s when we came up with this rule. And if we work together, within a few years, we're going to say, you know what? An SCA standard blow, and I'm just making this one up. This is just a place where I would start. If we imaginarily take off that imaginary chainmail hauberk and that imaginary conical helmet, and we're left with a bunch of padded armor protection like thousands of people wore in battles, maybe a standard thrust and a standard sword blow and a standard hammer blow and a standard glaive shot, maybe that'll break a bone or make you go numb or bust a rib or penetrate your lung through a padded gambeson. And what we're recreating instead of combat against imaginary hauberks is what we're actually recreating is combat against a bunch of standard gambesons. So that's my argument. I've been working towards it for a little while. I wanted to share it with you and get your opinion. It's based on 5 key points. If you disagree with any of those points, then you might say the whole argument falls apart. I'd love to hear where you disagree, because maybe I'm wrong. Or if you think my connection of those 5 key points doesn't yield the result that we should change our imaginary armor, then let me know. I'd love to hear it. Probably the best place to do so is in the comments on this video. The only thing I would ask is keep it respectful. If you get into a conversation or a debate with someone else, please keep it courteous, as if you were at an event talking to them in person. But otherwise, I would really like to hear what you have to think. I'm not convinced I'm right. I'm just feeling like I finally got to the point where it makes sense, and I wanted to share with you guys. I don't want us to have to change SCA combat. I'm not trying to tell you to take a heavier blow or a lighter blow. I'm not even telling you what the armor standard should be. I'm saying let's experiment. Let the people walking through the park decide where the path should be. Thank you very much for taking the time to listen.